You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Talking about climate change can be a hard thing to do. It's a complicated topic. It can often have doomsday vibes. A lot of the time, people don't want to hear about it. Yet deep down, I think most people know how serious a topic it is. How do we communicate better? As business leaders, as journalists, teachers, parents, as children, today we're going to learn from one of the best at it. Hi and welcome to Climate Conversations. I'm Jack Board. Hello, Liling Tan. How are you?
Hello, Jack. I am excellent, superb, sublime, all things considered.
Great to hear. No doomsday vibes from you today.
Not yet.
That's
Not
nice.
yet, but we'll get there quickly.
Not yet.
Yeah,
it's coming.
I'm sure it's coming.
How do you think about this generally? Because people all the time must ask you your thoughts about the climate, about the state of the planet. How do you communicate the knowledge that you have to people when they ask, or people that you care about, like your daughter, for example?
You know, I don't know who you hang out with, but people generally don't ask me what I think about the climate.
Too bad.
But where it comes to my daughter, she's nearly 5 years old, so naturally I tell her how the grown-ups have failed her and the generations to come, and how our rapid industrialization since, the late 1800s has gifted them all a legacy of death and destruction. So I say,
heavy,
expect typhoons, floods, droughts, disease. And then I say, Mama loves you, good night, big kiss. Mwah.
Cue the nightmare.
No. I teach her about how to conserve water, how to turn off the lights, respect energy and resource usage, recycle paper and plastics, and also hug the occasional tree.
Okay, sounds like you're doing well.
I'm doing okay.
All right, let's get into it. Starting with our weekly quiz, the best time of the week. Now, not everybody takes the climate issue seriously. Many people don't see or understand well the impacts of climate change in their part of the world. The question today is to rank these countries by the percentage of people there who think climate change is a major threat to their country. This is part of the communication story. If people aren't buying the science that's out there. Liling, you ready? There are 6 options for you this week.
All right, bring it on.
We've got Germany, France, Japan, Australia, Israel, and the USA. Quite a few to rank. I should note this is based on 2022 data from Pew Research.
Okay, let me chew on that.
All right, it's news time. Liling, what have you got for us this week?
I've got Brazil burning, and it's burning a lot. More than 50,000 active wildfires based on one estimate. Imagine that, Jack. And satellite images showed more than half the country itself engulfed in smoke. ABC News reported that much of this is a result of burning land for agriculture, made worse by the country's worst drought in 40 years, and rampant deforestation that's messing up rainfall as well. Why? Because science. Trees produce moisture that creates clouds that create rain. So no trees means less rain. Science. You're welcome. This hasn't really been making a lot of headlines here. Have you seen coverage of this, Jack? Of the fires in Brazil?
Not really.
Not much, yeah.
Which I guess goes to show that we've become used to this idea that there's going to be big fires in the Amazon. I mean, next month, Colombia, which is, right next to Brazil, is hosting COP16 on biodiversity. So, yeah, interesting timing for that. And now more dry weather, droughts, but this time we're shifting to Africa.
Yeah, the drought situation's really bad there. And in Zimbabwe, it's causing quite a major food shortage issue. Have you ever eaten elephant meat, Jack?
Absolutely not.
Me neither.
Not interested.
No, never even thought about it. But Zimbabwe could be serving that up soon. The country says it needs to cull 200 elephants to feed people facing acute hunger due to the worst drought in 40 years. And Zimbabwe currently has the world's second largest elephant population, reportedly about 100,000 of them. And the environment minister says it has more elephants than they need. But of course, news of the culling has sparked controversy. Critics say the animals drive tourism. and animal rights activists are calling for the elephants to be spared. And also, Zimbabwe isn't the first to do this. The drought is affecting many parts of southern Africa, where several countries have already declared states of emergency. Namibia recently announced plans to cull 700 animals, including elephants, hippos, and zebras, to feed drought-affected people. It's a bit mind-blowing, isn't it?
This is pretty grim news that you've brought us today.
Yeah.
These poor animals. Well, look.
Poor
I
people,
guess it's
too.
A state of desperation.
We got to talk about it, right? I mean, it is the reality.
Maybe we should have a mantra to bring positive news from now on. Let's see what our upcoming guest has to say about that.
Okay.
All right, let's go to our main story this week. Talking about climate change, it's kind of what we do here at Climate Conversations. That's the name of the podcast. I'm sure we could do it better, couldn't we? I definitely grapple with communicating our changing world all the time, humanizing the challenges, making these topics relatable, deciphering the science. Liling, I'm sure you'd concur, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when people tell me that climate change is a niche topic, and trying to explain that it isn't is quite a daunting task. I mean, we've called it niche topics here when we, planned for the show and all that. But the truth is, climate change affects everybody. It spans more than most, if not all, of what you see in the headlines, right? Wars, elections, cryptocurrency, space exploration, Elon Musk, Taylor Swift. Climate change has a role from transportation to travel, from energy and resource usage, food security, and politics. So the challenge really, I think, is in connecting the dots for people. And how do we do that?
And maybe you, our listeners, think about this too. So joining us today is a very special guest and expert climate communicator. Dr. Katharine Hayhoe is one of the most preeminent climate scientists in the world. She's the chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy, author of 2 books and more than 125 peer-reviewed papers, the creator of a viral TED Talk on climate change, and a few years ago was the United Nations Champion of the Earth in Science and Innovation. Katharine, so great to have you on Climate Conversations.
Thank you for having me.
Now, 5 years ago it was that you released a TED Talk saying that the most important thing we can do to fight climate change is to talk about it. Is that still true today?
I wish it were not, but sadly, according to the polling data, it still is. So where that idea came from is it came from the social science of people's opinions about climate change. When you look around the world, most people are already worried about climate change. This is true in the United States where I live. It's true across Europe and Asia and Africa and Latin America. But then if you ask, do you think it will affect you? There is still a significant gap between the people who are worried and the people who think it will affect them. And then if you ask one more question, do you ever talk about it or do you hear other people talk about it? The answer plummets. So how do humans work together other than by beginning to talk about something? So of course, talking is not sufficient, but talking is the necessary first step that many of us are not doing.
What is it about this topic that people are reluctant to talk about? Is it because it's something happening in the future in their minds? Is it a complicated issue? Why don't we discuss something that could force humans to no longer exist on this planet?
There's a few reasons, and believe me, I've asked people why. So I've collected the reasons why people don't have these conversations. And reason number one is that people don't want to have an argument with that one person they know who's absolutely convinced this is a hoax. And my advice to you is don't. You will not be able to convince those people. In fact, you'll just waste your time and your energy. But they only account for a small fraction of the population. People who are truly dismissive, people who, my definition of a dismissive is if an angel from God with tablets of stone appeared before them saying global warming is real, they would still reject the reality of climate change. Nothing I say will make a difference. So my advice is don't bother with that. Even in the United States, they're only 10%, and in other countries, they're much less. They're very loud, but only 10%. Then people say, well, I'm not a scientist. I say, well, the conversations we need to have are not about the polar bears or the ice sheets or the ocean circulation. We need to talk about the people and places and things that we love, how they're being affected. And today, we can all think of examples of how we've been affected by more severe weather because of climate change. And then lastly, and this is, I think, the biggest reason why we don't have these conversations, is because most conversations about climate change that we see, especially online, are so depressing. Doom and gloom. They make us feel worse after we're done than before we started. And who wants to talk about something like that? So social science has shown that doom and gloom gets the most clicks and shares on social media, but it is the worst at inspiring us to act. So instead, what I advocate for is having conversations about why it matters, the heart, and about what we can do about it, the hands.
How do you do it, though? I'd like to know. I mean, you've been on the list of Time's 100 most influential people and Fortune's list of 50 world's greatest leaders. I bet you're really popular at parties. Any tips on how to keep the climate conversation from becoming a conversation killer, especially if you're with people who are not in the climate space? Most of the time, I find people just change the subject or walk away. So I'm not much fun at parties. How do you do it?
Yes, I definitely have some tips. The first most important thing is to begin with something that you have in common. Begin with something they're interested in. So if they have just told you that they're very interested in beach vacations, then that's a good place to begin with something like, did you know? Did you know that the world's beaches are actually shrinking as sea level rises? So that's directly related to the beach.
Okay.
Or, so in my book, Saving Us, I give lots of different examples of conversations I've had. And then I even have a weekly newsletter called Talking Climate that has conversation starters every week. So one time a few years ago, I was speaking at a scientific society and a NASA scientist came up to me afterwards and he said, I am so concerned about climate change and I study climate change, but how do I talk about it with my friends? They don't want to listen, like you just said. So I said, well, what do you do with your friends? What are your friends interested in? He said, we cook together. We are all from different places around the world. And when we get together, we always explore new food and we cook together. So I said, well, that's where you start the conversation. Start with all the different changes that we're seeing in food around the world. So we have to start with something that matters to us, not something that doesn't matter to us. And then we always have to bring in positive, constructive solutions. And people might say, well, what solutions do we have? What positive news is there? So that's why I started my newsletter. And I was actually afraid I would run out of positive news because I'm doing this every week. And so I thought maybe I'll have a newsletter for 3 months and then I'll be done. It's been 2 years. I've been able to find so much positive news that most weeks I have 2 or 3 pieces of good news every single week. And so people leave those conversations feeling encouraged and empowered rather than depressed and paralyzed.
Okay. Yeah.
There's always new science, new research being done. The pure scale of what climate scientists are providing in terms of literature and understanding about the planet every year is immense. These reports come out, we read some of it as journalists, the public probably reads none of it. But I can definitely get a sense that scientists are starting to understand that the ways that they communicate their very important research is becoming increasingly important. And they're putting more effort into communication, making infographics, rewriting the ways that they've done their research into little topics that they think the public might be interested in. Is this something that you've noticed, and do you think that it's useful as a tool in society?
Yes, I absolutely do, because we could have the best science in the world, but if no one understands why it matters or how it informs our choices today, then who cares? So I've seen many of my scientific colleagues become much more interested in effective communication because you're referring to the IPCC reports, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports that come out every 5 or 6 years. They are doorstops. So they are incredibly dense.
But we don't print them out,
font.
of course.
No. And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a climate scientist. And the last time I read an IPCC report cover to cover was 2005. So most people are not reading those things cover to cover. They are incredibly dense, incredibly important, of course, sort of like the regularly updated encyclopedias of climate change. But people need to understand, like I referred to before, why it matters and what they can do. So I think of all of the science as being in our head. all of the data and facts and information, all of the information, like I said, about the ice sheets and the ocean circulation and even the extreme events that are affecting our lives, we need to help people make the head to heart connection. So my life, the places I live, the things I care about, and then we need to make that heart to hands connection, which is even more powerful. What can I do? The number one question I get as a climate scientist is it too late, or are we doomed, or where do you find hope? And this number two question I get now is, what can I do? And so I'm encouraged by seeing that many climate scientists are taking to social media. There's some who are very popular on TikTok or on Instagram. Blue Sky is where I find the most scientists. I actually curate a list of over 500 scientists who study climate on Blue Sky. There's some on Threads as well. Many are doing YouTube videos, but it's not just up to us. We need people who are really good at and expert at communication, like what you do. We need other people helping to share the word. Don't put it all on us scientists. It's time for everybody else to come in and lend a hand too. And I'm so encouraged to see that happening as well.
Now, for many people, though, who are struggling to make ends meet or feed their families today, the idea of addressing climate change because of some unforeseeable future danger can seem like a luxury, right? It's just not something they think they need to prioritize today. How do you change their minds?
It's no longer a future issue. So as we're speaking today, we're speaking in mid-September, there have just been devastating floods in Europe that destroyed many people's homes, infrastructure, and even took some lives. Meanwhile, a record-breaking typhoon has hit a number of countries in Southeast Asia just this same week, leading to hundreds of deaths and yet uncounted damages. We know that we've always had heat waves, floods, typhoons, hurricanes, wildfires, but we know that these are getting stronger. They're being supersized in a warmer world. There is no question our extreme weather is becoming more dangerous and more damaging. And so it is no longer a future issue. It is actually affecting us right now, right here. It's affecting the price of food. It's affecting the quality of the air we breathe. It's affecting the insurance people pay on their homes. And it's not just climate change. We also see the immediate health impacts of burning fossil fuels. Burning fossil fuels produces so much air pollution, it leads to over 9 million premature deaths per year. Which is just stunning, as well as contributing to dementia and learning disabilities and ADHD and all kinds of things, including even depression and anxiety is related to air pollution. So your question was a really good one because it emphasizes how we need to shift the discussion from the future to the present. We need to be talking about what is happening here where we live, what is happening today, not tomorrow, and then what we can do to make a difference both now and in the future.
In Southeast Asia, obviously, a lot of this region is considered the developing world. People are feeling the impacts, as you mentioned. They're also being asked to change their economies, change their behaviours, and they haven't caused this issue. And I think Indonesia is an example in a lot of the surveys showing that people there think they're being asked to do too much to solve the world's problems. From a policy maker perspective, how can that issue be tackled when your people are suffering but feel like it's unfair for them to be changing their way of life?
Climate change is a profoundly unfair issue. And in fact, that's why I'm a climate scientist. When I found out that it affects us all, but it doesn't affect us all equally, and those who have the least ability to influence the outcome are the ones who are most affected, the profound injustice of that was what led me to decide to become a climate scientist. Before that, I was planning on actually studying galaxies, of all things. So we do need change, but what we need in terms of behavioral change is for the easiest and most affordable option for everyone, especially lower and even middle income people and families and households. We need the easiest and most affordable choices for them to also be the best choices. Because right now, the easiest and most affordable choices for people in terms of food, transportation, other ways to live their lives, they're typically the worst choices. So our entire society and economy is structured to encourage and promote the worst choices. And they're totally right. The people that you referred to that were surveyed in Indonesia or in many other countries, even people living in low-income neighborhoods in high-income countries, they didn't cause the problem, and they are not the ones who set up the structure of our society to make the easiest choices the worst ones. So that's why we need system-wide change, so that all of the choices we make can be the best choices, that it's easier to walk somewhere than it is to take transportation. It's cheaper to take public transportation and faster too than it is to drive. If I am driving, it's a lot easier to find a place to charge my car than to find a gas or a petrol station. Now, of course, it's the exact opposite today, but we need a world where that happens, where it's easier to find fresh fruit and vegetables than it is to buy a $2 hamburger that was so cheap because they cut down the rainforest to farm the cows. So we need structural change, but what is that structure and system made up of other than people? And so when people ask me what's the most important thing I can do, I don't say reduce your personal carbon footprint. What I say, and this is based on the social science, is begin a conversation about the heart and the hands, why it matters and what we could do together, where you study, where you work, where you live, and catalyze larger change that affects more lives than just your own. Join a climate action group to help magnify your voice, and of course, those of us who have the ability, and I do, and maybe you do too, those of us who have the ability make changes in our personal life, but then make them contagious by talking about them. Change can happen, but it doesn't happen unless we have those conversations.
All right, we've got some small little scenarios. I want you to tell us how you communicate climate or climate issues with these types of people. We'll start with children. I mean, Liling is a parent. I'm sure she has to contend with this pretty often. How do you talk to kids about climate change?
Well, I'm a mother too, and in fact, I helped to co-found an organization called Science Moms that's about how to have conversations with your kids. So with our kids, they're often already very informed. They already know the basics. Climate is changing, humans are responsible. It's putting nature at risk, and it's also putting people at risk too. With our kids, it's so important to talk about what we can do to make a difference. And I have to say, kids' voices are incredible. Young people around the world are using their voices online, on social media. They're using their voices to sue governments for their right for a better future. They're using their voices to demand climate curriculum in their schools. Children are doing incredible things, and I think it's so empowering to show our children that even though they may be small, their influence can be outsized.
How do you explain certain climate concepts to teenagers who may not really be that interested in climate change and climate action? How do you explain carbon credits to a teenager?
Well, I'm not sure every teenager has to understand carbon credits, but I would start, especially with teenagers, start with what they're interested in. And so I have a colleague, Henry, who's an oceanographer, and he is really into online gaming. So he started a Twitch channel where he actually talks about climate change as he's gaming. So meet people where they're at, connect over something that you both have in common. If a teen just rolls their eyes at carbon credits, I wouldn't go there. I would ask them what they're interested in. I would listen to the answers. I would ask them even more questions. And then I would do my best to help connect what they already care about to why this issue matters and what they can do.
What about to somebody like my dad? If I wanted to explain Scope 3 to my dad and my uncle Kenny or my aunt Wendy, how do I explain Scope 3 to them? I mean, this is a generation that is so fixed and not really very involved, I think, at least where we are here.
I agree. And just to back up a second to teens too, there's so many thought leaders now in the music industry and the sports industry who care about climate change. And so often with teens, helping connect them or say, hey, do you like so-and-so? Oh, well, so-and-so really cares about climate change. Let's look at what she said together. So that's a good way to do that.
So making it cool.
Yeah, exactly. You know, Coldplay had the first sustainability report for any band's tour. Mm-hmm. There's a really great program called Reverb run by Adam from Guster that looks at reducing the carbon footprint of music events. Mm-hmm. Billie Eilish is very into climate action. There's entire bands now that their whole thing is getting people to show up and advocate for climate. So there's a lot that you can go there. And then we haven't even talked about sports figures. What about sort of the generation above us? We're sort of the sandwich right now, aren't we? Mm-hmm. Right in between.
Yeah.
Again, with my Aunt Lily or with my Uncle Joe, I wouldn't immediately jump to Scope 3 emissions. I would help them make that head to heart to hands connection. So I would really spend time, and with our family, maybe we already know this, but often I've realized we don't know what they're really passionate about, what they really care about, a place that they love or a thing that they love or a cause that they're devoted to or what makes them tick, and then help connect that to why climate change matters. And so, for example, my grandfather was a conservative businessman, sort of tended towards the right side of the spectrum. But there was one thing my grandfather loved more than anything, and that was his grandchildren. And so when I watched him, and I didn't even set out to do this consciously, but I watched as I got into climate change, how proud he was of what I was doing and how he started to clip things out of the newspaper and mail them to me all the time. And so he started to just follow all the news on climate change because he knew that was what I was doing. And he loved me so much that's what he wanted to do. Oh, I almost have tears in my eyes.
I know, me too.
So making that head to heart connection is so important. And then what is within their power to do? So if they still run a business, I wouldn't start talking about scope 3 right away because that's the emissions that sort of come into the, in terms of the supply chain or the products that you use. I would start talking about scope 1, first of all, because making changes that are tangible that you can see yourself. So making the office building more efficient, or providing places for people to plug in their cars or park their bike, or looking at public transportation passes for employees, or things like that, I think are much more tangible and obvious and give people a sense of pride. It's really important to see the fruit of our labors. And once we see the fruit of our labors, like in my book, Saving Us, I talk about my colleague, John, who his father, every time he went home, for dinner, his father would be like, well, John, there's more polar bears now than there ever used to be. How can you say climate change is real? But his father was a very thrifty person. And so when John helped him find a rebate on solar panels that allowed him to save huge amounts of money and even sell some of the power back to the grid, it enhanced his father's identity as a thrifty person. And so his father became very proud of being a thrifty person with solar panels. And then after about 2 years of telling John every month how much he was saving on his solar panels instead of talking about, how climate change was a hoax, after 2 years they were having dinner and his father said to John, he said, oh, climate change, it's such a big problem and I've always thought so. And John said he almost fell off his chair. But showing his father how he could be part of the solution was what changed his mind. The power of action is so incredible. And of course, the solar panels reduce carbon emissions, but the bigger change was in the attitude of his father. And then John even told me when his father had to sell his home and move to a senior's residence, his father was outraged that the seniors' residence didn't have solar panels. And so he was advocating for the seniors' residence to get solar panels. And so think of the larger impact of that. It's just so powerful.
Wow.
Do you think that as a broad global society, we have actually gotten better at this? And sometimes do you kind of just step back and think, wow, a lot has actually changed in this climate space. We have been successful in ushering in an increasingly green approach to life. Maybe not quite enough, but, the ball is moving.
Well, that's the thing. The giant boulder of climate action, it is moving. And it's moving in the right direction. It just needs to move faster. So often all of the news that we consume is incentivized to provide doom and gloom because that gets the most clicks. Now, we need to understand there's a problem. Don't get me wrong. We need to know why this matters and how it's affecting us. But in equal measure, we also need to know that positive solutions are happening. Otherwise, we feel like there's no point. And so it's sort of like climbing Mount Everest. You climb and you climb and you feel like you're never getting closer to the top. But if you turn around and just take a breather and look back from where you've come, you realize, oh my goodness, we're already at first base camp. So with climate, let me just give you a tangible example. When the Paris Agreement was signed back in 2015, the world was on a trajectory towards a 4 to 5 degrees C warmer world by 2100. 4 to 5 degrees. That's similar to our human body running a 4 to 5 degrees C temperature. It's life-threatening, not for the planet, but for us. Then now, 10 years later, thanks to all of the climate policies in place and the innovations in clean energy, we are headed to a world that is 2.7 degrees C warmer by 2100. Now, that's still not enough, but it's a lot better than 4 to 5 C. Renewable energy is overtaking, their installations have already overtaken fossil fuels. We're seeing changes all around the world. And so that's why every week I collect that good news in my Talking Climate newsletter, because we need to know in equal measures why it matters, the challenge that confronts us, as well as what the solutions look like so that we can add our hand to that giant boulder. And when we add our hand and when we encourage others to add their hand too, by using our voice to talk about it, that giant boulder of climate action will move even faster.
Katharine, if you have a little bit of time, Jack has a quiz for me that we usually do every episode. Would you like to participate in this quiz?
Okay, yes, let's do it.
Hey, so you're both going to answer it. Okay. Quiz time. The question is, rank these countries by the percentage of people from those countries who think climate change is a major threat to their country. We've got A, Germany. We've got B, France, Japan, Australia, Israel, and the USA. So I want to know which country's residents thinks climate change is going to be a major threat to them, down to from the most to the least.
I'm going to put France at the top, followed by Germany. Mm-hmm. I know the number for the United States. The number for the United States is 64%. And I'm going to put Japan above that and Israel below that.
And Australia?
Australia, I'm going to put above the US. So I'll put, let's see, France, Germany, Japan, Australia, United States, and Israel.
Liling, do you agree, disagree?
Okay, so I'm going to put Japan at the top because it's an island.
Okay,
and I
that's
think it's
good.
a very clear and present danger. And I'm going to go with France, like Katharine, because, Paris Climate Deal, I think they're very aware. Also, Europe is kind of ahead of the curve. So Germany after France. And then I'm going to go with Australia and the US and Israel last.
So you almost fully agree. And it's a pretty incredible result, Liling. You got them all correct.
No.
All correct.
Right.
6 out of 6. In the exact
That's the
order.
first time I've ever got a quiz like this
That's
right. So
amazing. All right, now Japan is going to stick in my head forever. It's right up there. I know that France is 86%. Okay.
This is 2022 data, so, may be slightly different to what you've seen. But yeah, Japan right at the top there. It's all pretty close at the top. But wow, US and Israel are well below the rest.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
That was fun.
That was fun.
So lovely to chat with you. And we can
Likewise.
do this again sometime, even when I'm back in North America. That's totally fine.
Really nice to have you on. I think it's useful to go back to some of these topics every now and then. So yeah, we'll definitely
We would
be in
love
touch.
to have you back. We absolutely would love it. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. This was a pleasure.
All right, that's it for Climate Conversations. Thanks as always for joining us. We'll be back next week.
Until next week, hopefully with a little bit more upbeat vibes. I'm Liling Tan. Bye for now.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
looking forward to that.
Okay.
I'm Jack Board. Thanks as always to the team that put together this podcast, Tiffany Ang, Janani Jahari, Crispina Robert, and Sai Yerwin.